on behalf of IntelliSpark and the School Counselor Central, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar for a continuation of a crucial conversation on the impact of diversity and equity and the impact it can have on social emotional learning. Again, my name is Derek Francis, and I have the awesome privilege to moderate a discussion on this topic. And we did that back in February, and I'm delighted to bring back today Alicia Oglesby and Josh Godinez. Before the discussion begins, I want to begin with a few housekeeping details. During our conversation, if you have questions for us, go ahead and use the question and answer session. We'll use the chat box to share our contact information with you and for information you can post. And then also, we want to get to know you a little bit. So feel free to share where you are from, where you're checking in from, what school you're at, what grade level, because it's exciting to make that human connection together where we get to just grow and who knows, we might meet each other at conferences down the road. So we'd love to know where you're coming in from. Again, thanks for checking out this webinar today. And so now what I'm going to do, I have the distinct pleasure to introduce to you Alicia and Josh. And so first, we'll start with Alicia Oglesby. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and a little bit about you, and then we'll have Josh introduce himself after. So go ahead, Alicia.
Yeah, thanks so much, Derek. And hello, everyone. Good evening for those of you who are on the East Coast and Central Time. I think Pacific is still in the afternoon. So it's good to see y'all, and I'm glad that you could be here with us tonight. My name is Alicia Oglesby. I am the Director of School Counseling at Bishop McNamara High School, which is in Prince George's County, Maryland, right outside of DC. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about this really important topic, and I hope that each of you can take back with you to your schools or to your offices some practical tools to use in the near future.
Cool. Thanks, Alicia. Josh Godinez, go ahead and share a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Hi, everybody, and welcome from the West Coast. For those of you that are out here, good afternoon, and those of you that are back east, good evening. My name's Josh Godinez. I am the current president of the California Association of School Counselors, who has a membership of about 2,000 of the 10,500 school counselors and growing in California. And we represent all things in California that deals with school counseling. During the day, I also have a day job as a full-time high school counselor at Centennial High School in Corona, California, and I'm just honored to be back with these two wonderful intellectuals and leaders in our field. Anytime that I can break intellectual bread with Alicia and Derek, I'm there. So thank you all for joining us today.
Awesome, cool. Thank you for being here. And honestly, y'all, this is going to be exciting. I'm pumped. Alicia and Josh are on spring break, so we know they're here from their heart, that they're loving and having passion on this work. And I'm excited for us to provide some real intense, direct, authentic feedback. Today's session is going to be it's designed where it's a group that's intimate. So share feedback, thoughts, because we want you to leave here when you're done in the next 50 minutes to have actual practical strategies. Leave here different than you came. And so I'm going to pull up my screen. We're going to do and just give you an overview of what we're going to cover today, and then we're going to get going. So let's see. All right, so there we are. Just to give you some information around our goals, what we're going to cover. We're going to learn about the impact of racism in schools. We're engaging in a dialogue to understand currently where we at in our country around race, equity, inclusion. And so we have to know how is racism showing up in schools. We're also going to learn age-appropriate strategies for talking about race with kids. Our goal is also to build stronger cross-cultural identity in our students, helping them understand about the cultures of other students and better understand their own identity. And then we're going to learn strategies that you can use to empower kids to speak up and address racism. And so to get us started, again, let's center in the importance of having these conversations. Our country has seen such a huge impact on things socially, politically, racially over the past year. There's been an increase in racism towards Asian American people, and that was right at the start of the pandemic. And so asking yourself, how were your conversations with students or even with your own kids when those incidents happened? And then we had the murder of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery. What were your conversations around those incidents? And then we're aware of also the insurrection. So it's important that we begin to set ourselves in the mindset of we have to have these conversations. It's important for us to take on the full role of educators to engage in this dialogue. Again, I'm here in Minneapolis area. The trial of Derek Chauvin has been taking the news here in the Twin Cities, and I would imagine around the country and around the world. Again, the murder of George Floyd poked a lot of people's hearts, especially corporately, to begin having dialogues around race. We had to. We didn't have a choice. We have students that watch the murder and heard the airplanes and smelled the smoke from their front steps. So we have to talk about race and discrimination in Minneapolis public schools. And so our goal is to give you all strategies, help you get an understanding of why we have to have this talk. And it doesn't matter what grade level you work in, whether it's elementary, whether it's middle school or high school, the research shows that kids are already able to understand racism at an early age. And so take a look here at some of the information around what age indicator kids are able to understand things around race. You see there between ages 3 to 5 years old, that's when kids are able to begin categorizing people by race and then expressing biases based on race. I know some of you may be familiar with like the doll test, or if you have worked with kids, they might say things like, why is their hair like that? Or I don't want to play with that toy. Or, you know what, I want to play with this group of friends. So it's important for us to understand that kids are recognizing a race and even picking up biases at an early age. And so it's important for us to also understand strategies for addressing race with kids. So we're going to watch a short video, and then we're going to have our panelists share strategies that they share about their upbringing and ways to talk about race strategies they've used to talk about race.
Race is one of those touchy subjects you don't really want to get into because you're afraid you might mess up. But the fact is that as early as 3 years old, children are classifying people based on their appearances. And so the worst conversation adults can have with kids about race is no conversation at all. Talking to kids about race needs to happen early, often, and honestly. Saying honestly, yeah, people are different, cultures are different, but that's a good thing. How boring would it be to have a crayon box that all had the same color? There are so many ways to approach racial conversations. You can use Dr. Seuss books. You can use any sort of pop culture reference. There are many, many movies, animated movies especially, that form a good entryway. So it's helpful, especially as a parent, to watch the movie beforehand maybe, or read a plot summary and say, well, what's happening here? Or look at all the other princesses. What do you notice about them? Do you think anyone can be a princess? Do they have to have a certain skin color or look a certain way? And it's usually good to sort of stop along the way, pause 2 or 3 times strategically, and bring up this conversation. Kids, just like adults, don't just respond to words. So this isn't just quote unquote talking to your kids about race. This is actually experiential learning that we need to do. I remember taking a class to the Lorraine Motel where Dr. King was assassinated. And when young people see that, that impacts them. And then we can use that experience, that hands-on, visceral encounter with race and racism, to have a much more substantive conversation, and it feels different. And you can do that in your own local city. There are historical markers, those signs you pass all the time and never read. Stop and read them one day. See what they say, see what happened there, see if you recognize the names, or if you don't, go and look them up. Utilize all the resources around you and make sure that you're not just talking to your kids about race and diversity and justice, but you're showing them why it's important. Racism is detrimental to the entire society, no matter if you're black or white, Latino, Asian, Native, whomever. Everyone is impacted, and that's why we need to raise a generation of people that's going to turn around and try to change that momentum toward the tide of anti-racism and racial justice.
Okay, so that video is designed to give us a framework to start off with our questions. And so just getting an understanding of having those conversations around race at an early age and giving some different strategies for how to do that. So panelists, if you can start off by kicking it off, thinking, how old were you when you first had a conversation about race? And who did you have that conversation with? Or you can share, what are ways that you introduce the conversation of race with the students that you work with?
Sure, I can start. So I think race has probably always been discussed in my home growing up, in my family. I grew up in Philly to Black parents, Black grandparents. Like many neighborhoods across the country, my neighborhood was segregated. So I had Black neighbors, and I went to school with other Black children. But my initial years, I did spend at a predominantly white Catholic school until about 3rd grade. And I remember asking my mom for this shampoo to make my hair look a certain way, like these waves that I saw in the commercial. And I remember my mom looking at me like, Alicia, you're Black. It doesn't work like that. And I was like, it was like an aha moment. And I think I was probably in 1st grade. And so, she would talk to me about some of the differences, and her approach was very positive. My mom was a school teacher. And so, she really framed it objectively. And I think that helped me contextualize and better understand that differences are okay. And so even in high school, African American studies was a class, and it was mandatory. And I went to an incredibly religiously diverse high school in Philly. So from a very early age, I learned about difference and racial difference, but I always associated it with learning from each other in more positive ways. Now, again, when I was in high school, that was also during the O.J. Simpson trial. So I'm dating myself, but that really sparked a very clear divide in my high school between Black students and white students that was noticeable, that was palpable. And I think that was one of the first times when I was really a little nervous about how we might approach the conversation of race.
Thank you for sharing, Alicia, about your experience and just upbringing. And it's so interesting, I think, for us to be mindful of not only your upbringing, but also students who may have similar upbringings in their neighborhoods and communities. Josh, how about for you? What was it like for you with discussions around race growing up? And then also, if you have any strategies you've used with students in school as a counselor, feel free to share around that too.
Yeah, no, great, thanks. It's interesting because I am biracial. My mom is white and my dad is Mexican. So I grew up seeing, and my dad is fairly darker in skin, and my mom is fairly lighter in skin. So my earliest memories are of having two parents who look completely different. And then so going to school, as Alicia said, I went to a series of predominantly Latino schools, being in the area of Palm Springs that I grew up in. But it wasn't really anything that seemed out of the ordinary because my parents looked different. So it really confused me, if I can be honest, as I grew up. Once I started to realize that these differences were things that not everybody just embraced as, who we are as people. And so growing up in the environment, I started to realize, because it was my friends that would point out, like you're not white enough to be white, you're not Mexican enough to be Mexican, and then I'd have friends call me, different playful things that they would think of, like Twinkie, right? And I'm sitting there examining, like, what does that mean? Do I have to be one or the other? Because, as you grow up through adolescence, you're trying to find your identity. Well, all of a sudden, everybody around you, when you're biracial, is like, you're not enough to be us, but you're not enough to be us either. And so you're like, oh, great, I don't belong to anybody, is really what it comes down to. So it was an interesting exploration, because then you had all of the, cultural differences that popped up. On this side, that's my second cousin. On that side, that's my tia, which is aunt in Spanish. And I'm like, wait, why are you my aunt on this side and you're my second cousin on this side, but you have the exact same relation to me, on both sides of the families? So it allowed me at a very early age to be very aware of cultural differences and question those things. And really, it was leaving the area, because it is, like I said, a pretty homogeneous area for the schools that I went to see that, wow, because I would read about these stories. But to me, when you're 12, 13, there's stories, right? I didn't live that. That was not my lived experience in the bubble of Southern California. And so I didn't really understand or see division as something that people viewed negatively until I got to college. And that really took me by surprise, because I thought, what do you mean that we don't embrace and celebrate, how we're different, and then question, it was really a little bit of an awakening to me, because, we want people to do the work. And this is what I tell kids. You've got to do the work. If you don't understand, something about anything, you want to be an inquisitor. You want to inquire, but you've got to go do the work yourself to figure out what your questions are. And so you can't expect other people to do the work for you. So don't just show up, and if you don't understand something about somebody's culture, somebody's sexual preference, and expect them to be the spokesperson for all people, But at the same time, once you do the work, if you have legitimate questions, you've got to be careful with the way that you phrase it too, because you want to open a dialogue about it. And so you want to say, I've learned this, but this is what I'm curious about. Can you share your experience? Because every individual is going to have a different experience. Might be a shared experience, but we all have different variables in our life where we share pieces with other people, and we're different than other people. So even though people may look the same, they may not have had the same journeys, opportunities, and those roads might look completely different. So by only asking one person, you are not doing the work. You need to do the work ahead of time, figure out what your questions are, and then you need to ask multiple people so that you can grow. And that's what I tell kids when we sit and have these conversations, that we need to do it together. We need to be open, we need to be honest, and we need to do it in safe spaces. And as we've gone through the first half of this year, we've been doing that a lot at the high school that I've been working at. We call it Vibe Check. And it's 1 hour where everybody leaves titles at the door. It's the staff, it's the students. We come together and we just talk. And what are you curious about? What are you wondering about? We've gone through so much in the last year that there's so much to talk about, but you need to have a safe space to do it. And I'm going to be quiet because I can, me, I can go on and on and on and on. So Derek, back to you.
No, those that are listening and taking notes, you shared so much. One of the things that I really latched onto was just when you're sharing about building identity. You were giving strategies. So I hope folks who are listening in are able to take notes. You shared about ways students can start engaging with each other to learn about each other's identity if they're curious, because I think they are. So finding ways for them to be able to have that dialogue with other kids in schools. Before we go on to the next topic, do you all remember anyone in your school growing up or facilitating conversations around race, or helping you understand how to connect with people from different backgrounds? And do you have any strategies that you've used to help students just with understanding the concept of race or identity?
Yeah, so unfortunately in elementary school, no. And I think that was a big missed opportunity because, being young and sort of having this inquisitive nature, like Josh was talking about, we really were able to absorb so much information really quickly. And I think that, in first grade, second grade, third grade, I remember asking tons of questions about things and people. But there really wasn't any explicit conversations or activities where we had the chance to really learn about culture, learn about race, celebrate differences, which was unfortunate, because I think we could have used that and we could have learned from that. And we had a fairly cohesive school environment, but I think that it could have been even more beautiful if we had those experiences. Now in high school, absolutely. We had Multicultural Day, which is still known throughout the city as one of the most exciting days of the school year at my previous high school. But even so my daughter is in third grade, and so I'm pretty adamant with her school counselor about making sure that they have those books and that she's using those books because literature is such an easy access point for counselors and for teachers to have these SEL lessons and to really talk about difference and celebrate difference in every way, right? In every area of the school. And I think that is a point that I often really want to drive home, is that sometimes our counseling lessons can get drowned out by a focus on content. And I think that there's space for all of it. I go into art classes, music classes. For my daughter's Christmas celebration, she's at an Episcopal school. For their Christmas celebration, there was a focus on gospel music. And you know what I mean? So like just pulling in all of these various communities to learn about and learn from, I think is so, so, so important. And we really cannot ignore those early childhood years.
And I want to say ditto to all of that. One thing that I will say, and I'm going to put my teacher hat back on, I was a teacher for 10 years, history teacher in the high school. And one thing that was noticeable to me was the absence of culture in our books. And what I would challenge teachers out there, K-12, to do is do that work. Figure out who's missing from those books. Because we have a rich Asian cultural history. We have a rich African-American history. We have a rich Latino history. What are contributions, to events and, the different wars throughout history and innovations? And where are they missing in the curriculum that you can bring it in? It isn't about not teaching what we're expected to teach by standard. It's about how do we enrich and empower the students that look like people that might have been left out of those books, so that they understand that they have a place in America too. And I think that's what we're going through as a society right now. As painful as it is, we need to look at it as an opportunity to empower all Americans to see themselves in history and see themselves in the future.
See, and I think that right there, for those listening in, as you're hearing these strategies, because you all are dropping strategies, and I hope folks are picking up on it. You're sharing something huge, especially for career development. How are you showing students representation of their identity in your books, in your content? And we're talking at an early age. So elementary, middle, high school, how are you doing that exposure where they're seeing their identity affirmed? Thank you so much. And I'm excited because we do have some more time to talk about identity. And I wanted to also, I'll pull my screen back up briefly to share with you all. Oh, there we go. One thing that I wanted to share, and I know some folks as you're thinking about how do you lead this work moving forward, I just want to share an idea of something we do in Minneapolis Public Schools. Is we introduce the topic of race using books. And so we've been using the book, The Color of Us, and we talk about since our district's so diverse that we want to create a more unified district, and our schools for students to see the beauty in people who look like them and people who don't look like them, and to have those conversations. So we align it with our district values and missions, and we share with kids. That's why we're having this conversation about race and the color of us. And so that's one idea. It's a recorded lesson that if anyone wanted to check out, I'll make sure to share with IntelliSpark so they can have an idea of how to introduce the topic of race with kids. So now we're going to move on to a topic that really pains my heart that we have to talk about, because I see it here in Minnesota all the time. Racism in schools. We know some of you are seeing Minnesota on the map for racism publicly with the murder of George Floyd, but that goes even deeper with our schools as well. We see a lot of racial incidents in Minnesota in our schools. I've been in a building where we had major racial incidents. And so this is just to give you an idea of the nature of what racism has looked like in the schools here in Minnesota over the past 5 or so years. And as you can see, there's a nature in these incidents, whether it's things that are said, actions, things to trigger racism. And I think it's important for us as educators to know how racism shows up in schools. So it shows up in our hallways, in our staff trainings, in the bathrooms, the policies that we have in our schools, how students are labeled. And so I think it's also important to look at how racism is showing up in our country in this very moment. And I want to make sure that I'm speaking as an accomplice, someone who's going to stand by our Asian American community, because right now Asian Americans are being discriminated against very heavily in our country. And so that looks like verbal harassment, shunning. But what pains my heart so much is knowing that there's people that are actually being physically assaulted because of their ethnic and racial identity. And so it's so important that we begin to call out these instances. And I want us to take a moment for a listen to how kids describe their experiences, what they've heard, what lies they've heard in school. So yeah, you guys get to hear, I'll see all my notes. Sorry. Here comes the lies. So take a listen, and then we'll debrief around how do you address racism in schools.
The lie. Muslims are terrorists.
Black boys are bad.
Girls are not athletic.
Latinos can't speak English well.
Chechens are a bad influence on others. Africans aren't smart.
Asians can't play sports.
All black people are thieves.
People from Mexico bring nothing good.
I'm too pretty to be Togolese.
The lie. All white people are racist. The truth. I'm white and I'm not racist. I care for people who are of another race. I may have brown skin, but I'm the same as you. If you test me, I will succeed. And you underestimate me for the color of my skin, I'm tired of the hurtful words.
Latinos like me can speak English well. They are learning, doing their best. Have you learned a second language? It's hard, and yet people yell at Latinos because they don't understand what they are saying.
Why? Why do they say that? Why do they? What did I ever do to you to make you judge me and say that? You should know, not all Muslims are terrorists.
But you push me down just to pull yourself up. You use lies to make me feel like that's what I really am. Like I really am a thief. But I know I'm not a thief because I still am just like you.
So you shouldn't judge me or people like me. So why are you judging them? You don't know them. So stop the lies. Don't let the others brainwash you.
Those negative words are a noisy room full of rumors. I just want to cover my ears and just forget.
What is the truth? I know the truth. The truth that lies in my heart. The truth about black boys. I am black. This is me. The lie about black boys that I don't believe in. And I know it's not the truth. Because the truth that is real is my truth.
Girls can definitely be athletic.
I am Asian. I play soccer.
I can be pretty and be Togolese.
Beautiful people come from all over the world.
I am Latino, and I can speak English.
I'm not a thief. I've never stolen anything.
I'm not a terrorist, so think again.
I am black. I am not aggressive. I would not harm anyone. Everybody deserves equal rights. Everybody deserves respect for who they are. Racist people don't believe these things. I'm not one. I am me.
All right, I don't know how many times I see that video and never loses its impact, hearing out of the mouth of babes the experiences of what they're hearing and seeing in school. And so I want us to pause now, because that's our students sharing their raw, authentic truth. And this is what happens in schools. I've heard it in the hallways. I've had racial incidents happen at the schools I've worked at before. And so I want to be honest about this happening in our schools as we speak. And so our question now for our panelists, Josh, Alicia, how do you address racism in schools? What are some proactive things that you all know that you can do to address it? And first of all, how have you seen racism show up in school? So I'll pause and let you all share, and then we provide some strategies.
You know, it's interesting, I think, for us living in a bubble in Southern California, because it's not as outward as it would be in other parts of the country. People will say things and you catch it. And you know what's interesting, and I think that we do it a lot as educators, is we say, stop that, that's wrong, okay? Which is a natural reaction for us, right? But what we don't do is we don't open the conversation to find out, why do you believe that that is okay to say that? And we've got to start there with, tell me more. You just said this. What makes you think that? Because you've got to start where they are if you're going to move them anywhere else. And the other thing that we have to remember, especially working with adults, is that implicit bias has maybe existed for decades in these people. So one conversation is not going to miraculously change them. But if you continue to chip away and you continue to question why their belief system is what it is, you might be able to open that heart up and break in just a little bit to slowly help shift that mindset. So you can't think of it as a one and done. You've got to look at it as a continual journey, and any progression is a win. Because we know, even in our lifetimes, as sad as it is, we have to acknowledge that we can only hope to get better, but the journey will continue long after we exist. And the other thing that I tell kids is, you've got to always look, because it hurts, right? And this is one thing that I want us to embrace for the school counselors on here. We talk a lot about social emotional learning, which is key to our profession, and we push it. But what we have to embrace as a profession is that we are school-based mental health professionals. You've gone to school for years to understand solution-focused therapy, cognitive behavior, all of this that has prepared you for existing today in this moment in time in education. And when people say, but you're not a licensed therapist, you're right, we aren't. And the analogy that I give back is, for us here at CVS and Walgreens, and I know on the East Coast it's like Dwayne Reed and a few others, but when you go to that local drugstore and you go down aisle 3 and you pick up those ingredients, let's say that you have a stomach ache and you go pick up, I don't want to endorse any companies on here, but you go pick up that antacid and you feel better. That's what a school counselor does. If you need more than that antacid, then you're going to go to the pharmacist, who's the specialist. And that's how it exists in education. We are aisle 3. We are aisle 3. And if we need to send you to the pharmacist, we're going to send you to the pharmacist. But start with IO3. So counselors out there, embrace that you are a school-based mental health professional, and these kids have trauma, and we've got to help give them those antacids with cognitive behavioral therapy, solution-focused therapy, choice therapy, and all the therapies that we have in our toolbox to help make a better tomorrow. Alicia, I'm going to turn it over because, again, woo, I get fired up.
IL3, we need Josh in IL3. Josh in IL3.
That's right, Dr. Reese. Josh is going to go ahead and preach this evening. I'm here for it. I'm here for it. And I totally agree. We have so many tools at our disposal that we really have to be prepared to use when we need to. And so I've certainly had incidents at almost every school where I've worked where there have been issues of race and racism, and where students were negatively impacted by a comment or a policy or any of these sorts of things. And it is exactly my job to intervene. It is exactly why I am a school counselor, to interrupt and step in and say, okay, this isn't working for this group of students. This isn't working for students who all share this particular demographic. And so I think that is so important, and it can't be overstated, that this is our lane, right? When we're thinking about people need to stay in their lane, this is ours. And so we really need to make sure that we are stepping in and stepping up when we need to and how we need to make sure that the adults in our building are understanding what the concerns are, what the issues are, that we're making sure that our students and our families are understanding. I've had students who have used the N-word in previous schools, and so I had to, let go of this nice counselor syndrome that we talk about, and really be firm and clear with students and with teachers that this is not something that we're going to allow in our school community. But then laying out all of the reasons why and what we're going to do instead and how we're going to address this ongoing, so that I'm not having to react to this every time it happens, or if it happens. We're going to create the kind of school environment where a person wouldn't dare. Right. And so that's our work. That's what we're charged to do. That's what we're tasked to do. And we really need to know our school communities. We need to know who in our building is really in our corner for this work and will help us do this work. We really have to understand the complexities of these issues. And, ASCA and our regional SEAs, we have information. We're, collating information and curating lists and resources and webinars and all of these experiences so that we can be well informed. And, just like we need to know what to do if a student comes to our office with suicidal ideation, we need to know what to do in our school when racism is persisting and persists. And so that's part of our learning. That's part of our experience. Our students cannot afford for us to be timid and scared of these issues. They are bearing the brunt and the burden of racism, of transphobia, of sexism, of all of these things in our schools. They cannot afford for us to sit back and hope that, through kindness, it'll all get worked out, because we've done that. And we know that that's not the only thing that we need in our school communities. So, so yeah, we need to just make sure that we are really well informed and that we are staying in our lane. And this is our lane. This is our aisle. Right.
Tag me back in.
Yes.
So,
yes. Go for it.
One strategy that I wanted to give that I think is very practical that I use, and I know that we've talked about it when, we've done our thing, is that, when that student comes in, you want to acknowledge and be present for them. And you want to make sure that you get them into a space where they realize they don't have to embody what is being said. We have to act on it. We have to empower them by saying things like, well, how much does that other student that said that mean to you? Well, they don't. Well, do you ever go to the mall with them or hang out with them? No. Well, then why would you give them all of your power? Why would you give them your emotion if they don't really matter to you? And we have to sit with that for a little bit. And it's not saying that we're not going to do something. Absolutely. We need to address it and we need to do something about it. But we have to teach students not to hold on to that, especially from people that don't know them for who they are and how incredible they are, and have their own hang-ups that have nothing to do with that student as an individual. So that's something that I use with students. And then once we get past that, absolutely, you know, everything Alicia said, I'm just like, yes, yes, yes. I could just spend all day following Alicia going, listen to her, listen to her, listen to her, because I agree with everything.
Yes, yeah, I'm enjoying the dialogue of just seeing you all share off of each other's energy, and thankful for folks who are chiming in the chat. Please, this is a dialogue. This is a discussion. We're in this as educators together. So you all add to the richness of the dialogue. So please keep it coming. I'm going to go ahead as we segue into our last topic. And I've been enjoying our time with you all. I hope you're relaxing. Hope you got pen and pad out. Matter of fact, this next part, I would even say I would not even be grumpy if you decide to screenshot it, because I'm one of those people who I've been in spaces. I work in Minnesota. It's predominantly white staff, white students, and it's gotten to a point where I've heard the N-word enough. I've seen enough students say it and say, Mr. Francis, I didn't mean to. I would never say that about Black people. And I've gotten to the point where my skin can only be so thick. And so I really do feel I'd be remiss if I didn't give strategies of words you can say and give your kids to say to speak up, your students. So even in Minneapolis last week, we did a lesson where we told students, we gave them scenarios and said, hey, if someone said something hurtful to you or your friend of this background, how can you speak up? We're giving them words, because so many times even people say, oh, I don't know what to say. So here's some sentence stems. I think we got to give them, jumpstart them. And so you can have the students say, hey, you know what was said? That's not okay with me. Or, you know, that comment you made about Black people in our town, that could be really hurtful. Or even I share with students, you know, even when you're in your affinity space where you're with people who look like you're the same race, letting them know, hey, you know what? I know those words may not hurt people that are here with us, but I know if you say that at school, and even me, it could hurt people. It's offensive. And so it's important that we give kids the words to say so that they know and get in the habit of combating racism. And I don't want to just say kids, because racism happens with your staff too. Staff will do racist things and say hurtful things. So these are some ways to address microaggressions and racism from staff. Seek clarity. Tell them, hey, tell me more what you mean when you say that about our EL students. Or, you know what, have you ever considered the reason why our students are feeling like that is because they're dealing with other issues at home or in their family or maybe here at school? I think it's important that we call out racism in our colleagues. And so what we're going to do next is talk about, close out with talking about identity. Our country is becoming so much more racially and ethnically diverse, but also we have people who have multiple identities, and not just racially, but ethnically and a variety of other identities. So it's important that we're able to help develop our students and their identity. And so what I'm going to do is show a brief video of students speaking out what their identities are. And then our goal is to see how can we help students begin to speak boldly about the multiple identities that they have. So let's take a quick listen for 20 seconds to students talking about their boldness in their identity.
I'm from Haiti and Nigeria. Like 3 things, like I'm Dominican, Puerto Rican, and Black. I'm biracial. I have an African-American father and an Irish-American mom.
My name's Lamine. I'm Muslim.
I'm Indian, British, Scottish, and American.
So you've seen that video, you have youth speaking confidently, boldly about their different identities, whether it's racial or ethnic or religious. So I want to share, I have our panelists share, what are some strategies you've used? What are some things you feel school counselors can do to help develop students' identity of themselves?
So I actually really love affinity groups when done well. As I mentioned before, my daughter is in 3rd grade, and as early as 3rd grade, they have an affinity group at her predominantly white Episcopal school. And so it's a time for students to learn about Black history and to just be in community with each other as, you know, as children of color, you know, predominantly Black children. And so I think that that is, if done well, right, that's the caveat, you know, it has to be really purposeful and intentional, and led by someone with a lot of knowledge. And you know, they have activities and they have programs where they learn about, you know, Misty Copeland and Venus and Serena Williams. And so it's empowering. It's an empowering space for those students, and they have multiple affinity groups within that school. So they have an affinity group for Latino students where there are celebrations, and once a year for each group, they have a sort of open activity where anybody can come into the space and learn about what they've been doing throughout the year, or get a special presentation or something like that. And so I really like affinity spaces, affinity groups. We have them at the high school as well. They're fairly popular at most colleges and universities. And so I think in those spaces, as well as in the literature, you know, I appreciate the English department chair checking in with me about books that she might be including in English classes, and guest speakers that we have coming to the school, and making sure that there's a good representation of various people from various backgrounds. And so I think that all of these things combined, right, we don't have to choose just one way or another, are really great ways to empower students. And I know we talked about that before, and Josh brought up that word because it's so incredibly important to empower and affirm students' identities, and make sure that they understand the power in their history. And I think it's especially important for students of color to make sure that we are being as inclusive and empowering as possible, because, you know, oftentimes our society is the exact opposite. And we have to really work with our white students to understand and help them understand whiteness and what that means, and that they don't have to be ashamed and they don't have to be guilty, but we do want them to stand alongside students of color and their friends in school and their friends in the community in ways that they can, because I think sometimes that shame and that guilt leads to other negative behaviors that we don't want to see long term. And so many different ways to make sure that we are affirming our students and making sure that their voices are heard, that we're not standing in the way of them sharing their voices.
Well, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, no, that's okay. You know, I'm listening and all of that. Yes, the only thing that I think that I could add to that is have them explore their own families. I think the one thing that is so easy for us to do that we often miss, and we can work with our teaching friends out there or as counselors, and give them sentence starters. You know, go ask your, you know, whoever, go ask somebody at home, what is one of the greatest lessons you've learned from, you know, the generation before? I mean, there's so many questions that you could ask them so that they could learn their family history. And then when they bring it back, use that as an empowerment conversation starter so that students are exchanging their own personal histories to validate the identities and then celebrate all of the amazing things that you're hearing. You know, I can say from my own story, one thing, I had to do one of these in school, and I didn't realize the power of history in my family. Like my great-grandfather came up during the Los Meneros movement into New Mexico, and that's where my grandma grew up. And then she came to California and met my grandfather, who had come up through the Mexican Revolution, and talked about his journey with me, you know, to escape Pancho Villa before he raided the village coming up over the border. And I think, wow. And then as I learned about the history and the context of the Mexican Revolution, and through American history, you know, the different movements that brought minority groups into the country, all of a sudden I had an identity. And I was like, that's my family history. And I couldn't be more proud to be part of it. So it's just another great strategy to help students discover who they are and then have it validated without them knowing, by learning it through their actual educational courses.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you all, man, the depth of information you all are sharing, and I hope folks are capturing it, grabbing notes, because the goal of this is for it to be things that you all are able to transfer over into your work. And I know I heard so many different strategies. I know the Affinity Groups one stood out to me. That was one huge one that stood out. And I think just hearing the strategies to build relationships with people of different backgrounds. I see Nancy shared in the chat as well, how she helps to run an international community outreach. I think that's an amazing idea of a way to engage in these dialogues with our students and their families. I think it's so huge that that kids are able to learn, like you said, learn more about themselves. Ask people in their family about what are things about our culture. Tell me more about the food. My daughter is biracial, and her mom is white, and so I always make sure to be intentional too, to learn more about not just the food. You know, I love hot dish, tater hot dish and all that, but I want to get to know more than just the food part of her European culture. So knowing more about her French side and help her know more about her Norwegian side. So I think even when we say identity development, it's important. I think even I talk to white students, like, you got an identity too. You got so many different parts to you. You're not just white, you know? And so I think helping to develop that fullness of who they are, where do they come from? And then also helping them encourage to see, well, if that's what people who look like me have done before, it'd be really cool to learn more and see how I can do some of those things. I also wanted to share something we just went on a limb on in Minneapolis. And we were like, you know what? We've realized there's so many parents who will say they haven't had opportunities to talk about race or identity with their kids. They don't know where to begin. And that there's so many times where they didn't have those conversations growing up. And so we started bringing in diverse community members to open up about their experience with race and racism and how they address it in their family and how they're raising their own children now, what conversations they're having. So I really want to encourage you all to do something like that for your community. Yeah, it can be a little nerve-wracking or scary at first. We don't have a choice. We're here in Minneapolis proper, where you have to have the conversation about race because kids are having it every day. And they're experiencing it. If they're old enough to experience it, we're definitely going to have to start talking about it. And so I wanted to stop my screen and see if there's any final thoughts from either of our panelists before we close out for tonight. Any final suggestions you want to provide based off of the topics that we covered tonight?
Yeah, I'll go first. I see from Narissa that there's a question in there about any advice to get admin more open to the idea of having affinity groups. And Alicia, I'll volley that part over to you. But one thing that I think you could do, Narissa, just to address it is maybe it doesn't start as an affinity group. You know, maybe it starts as a group like we were saying, you know, like I was saying with, you know, having them explore family history, and then you do small breakouts, you know, and magically these breakouts, you know, become little affinity groups. So you're not really holding an affinity group, but you're giving a safe space for affinity conversation, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to say that, and keep doing the work. That's all I've got to say is this is a journey, and we can't say it enough. And we will keep saying it until we get to our retirement parties and probably even beyond then, because that's what we got to do. And thank you all. Being here today means that you are doing this work with us, and we're here for you. And don't be afraid to reach out, because we're all in this together, and our students deserve it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Our students do deserve it. And I love being able to lean on my colleagues and just hear from what they're doing in their schools. And like Josh said, just having sort of this intellectual space where we can talk about these things and think through these things together. I mean, it means the world. And I don't think that I could do it every day, day in and day out, if I didn't have people around me who were also doing it and also really valued that work. And I cannot overstate student input. You know, students have an awareness to what is happening around them that is just so incredibly important and vital to the school community. And so students will tell you if, you know, they really think they need a space, or, you know, there are things happening within the school that they're not happy with or comfortable with. And so I think really letting students have that voice and push that need for potentially an affinity space is really important. Administration has a wonderful way of listening to students and families. And so I think that's really important for us to really back them up and be a support in getting that created.
Mm-hmm. Goodness. And again, I'm sitting here trying to soak it all in, and I'm taking notes while y'all talking too. You guys dropped such good nuggets of information, and I think as you were sharing, just being able to do this work together, co-laboring is what keeps coming to my mind when I hear you saying that having colleagues to lean on to do this work. And so I want to again thank everyone for being here to connect, to engage, to dialogue in a topic that's so important for our country in order for us to heal the divides that we have. And so, again, I want to say thanks to our panelists, Alicia Oglesby and Josh Godinez, for being here today. And I want to also say we appreciate IntelliSpark and School Counselor Central for bringing us all together this afternoon. To learn more about IntelliSpark's innovative technology for providing holistic student support and access their student success tools at no cost, please visit IntelliSpark.com. A recording of this webinar will be made available, and I invite you to share it with colleagues who could not attend. Again, thanks to our panelists for this thoughtful conversation and for being here and leading this webinar. And we want to say thank you for attending. And we hope that you attend some of the upcoming webinars that are being hosted by IntelliSpark. Thanks again and have a great night.